All right. Sorry about that break, everybody. Yeah. So what I wanted to say about Lee was that he was an intellectually uncurious man and kind of, I think, maybe very boring.
He was a snob.
And a snob.
Yeah, he's
I
a
mean,
snob.
the Native American people, I just find them fascinating and their history and their culture. And he just had no interest in getting to know them. He, it was just so superficial. He calls them paint and ornaments and just so
I don't even
dismissive.
think he wanted to even take the time to try.
No.
And
All he wanted to do was, yeah,
go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, all he wanted to do was be back in Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like,
Well, no, wait a minute. I'm going to have to stop you for just a second.
okay.
I do have something I wanted to read. I'm going to back up just a little bit from his when he was with the Army Corps of Engineers. And there's a really good point, because as a good Iowa citizen, I would not be doing us any favor if I did not read this quote directly from Lee about Iowa.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you remember this, but
I do.
so I'm going backwards on the timeline for the viewers,
Yep.
but he was sent out to St. Louis to take care of an island, and the way the water came down the river, it was washing away one bank and adding soil to the other bank, and it was basically going to leave St. Louis high and dry, if I understood it correctly. And so Lee was sent out with the Army Corps of Engineers to go fix the problem. Yeah. And so he went upriver trying to figure out, just the different flow of the river, where all this is coming from, all the water's coming from, all that kind of stuff. To explain it much more, I'm going over my head. So I'm going to stop trying to explain it. But I did want to read this, and I had to figure out a way to get this in, Peg. Okay. So this is his description of, I thought it was Iowa. Correct me if I'm wrong. It might be across the river in Illinois, but it's the same area.
Yeah.
I think it was Iowa, though. But he said, and I quote, "This is a beautiful country and must one day be a great one." And he extolled the soil to Carter as magnificent to the eyes of the uninitiated. Nothing can be finer. At the upper rapids, I dug down 3.5 feet into the soil and could see no difference. An entire mass of blacklight mold that you could cultivate with your feet. The accounts they give of their crops are enormous and surpass belief. And that was on page 70. So like I said, I went backwards,
yes.
But I definitely had to get that in there, that little, point for Iowa, because we were a beautiful country with beautiful soil. And anyway, all right. So this little commercial's over. We can get back to
the Iowa Chamber of Commerce message now has.
Yep, they owe me some money now. So.
Well, he did have an eye for a good soil, right? Even though he proclaimed that he wanted to be a simple farmer, but that was more. Yeah. I think Guelzo says that was more wishful thinking. He never really tilled the soil or did anything like that. He was still very much, the upper crust gentleman, right? Exactly. That had everyone else do the work for him. Let's see. Oh, okay. So we're moving on. Do we have anything to say about his Mexican War experience? Did anything jump out at you?
The only thing that jumped out at me is he was pretty impressive for never being under fire before that point. He was pretty impressive as a soldier. But there were a lot of them that were pretty impressive as soldiers for never being actually under fire. That's kind of just the big thing. Everyone said he was brave. And then probably the second thing is I thought he got the short end of the stick quite often when it came to promotion. And that was pretty demoralizing for him to never get the promotions that he should have gotten, that everybody else around him was getting. And they probably were not even doing as much as he was in the overall effort, at least according to Guelzo anyway.
Yes, according to Guelzo. Yeah, so the promotion system was notoriously slow, like molasses, in the regular army back in the mid 19th century. So it took the Civil War to really, just put that on hyperdrive. and everyone's getting breveted and everything else. I mean, there was one, I think, Winfield Scott, the famous, beloved hero of the War of 1812, he adored Lee, and Lee worked with him underneath him. But there was I guess there was one thing he did in the Mexican War that I wasn't aware of. He calls it crossing the Pedregal. It was like a big rocky expanse, and he had to move guns from one place to another, and apparently it was very dangerous, very exposed. So I mean, he did, I think in that episode he was very much kind of in the thick of it, and he had to cross this huge expanse to get the guns that I think then shot down into the valley and helped them win the battle. I'm forgetting which battle it was, but it made people admire Lee. And so he was in this great position. And of course, Winfield Scott, by the time as we approach with the talk of secession, right? And the Kansas-Nebraska bill that really kind of set everyone off because it negated the Missouri Compromise, right? And then again, we come back to the contradiction, the mystery of Lee. He thought secession was horrible. Okay, so go with that. He thought secession was a terrible idea. He knew the strength of the North, the industrial capacity.
He says at the beginning and end of the book, if we do this, we're doomed. He pretty much came out and said that if we go against the North, we are doomed. We don't have, like you said, the industrial capacity.
Right. And so we get to that portion of the book. It's called a chapter. The chapter is called, the chapter is called The Decisions. And these decisions were, one of them, I'm trying to remember what the first major decision was, but obviously the big decision was to not accept the offer to lead the Union forces. After South Carolina seceded, he kind of went underground, right? I think he was thinking it would blow over, is what Guelzo kind of portrays it as. He was hoping that, that it says here, I think on page 182, that Lee was hoping a peaceful solution, would still be attained. He still was hoping, after Lincoln was inaugurated as the 16th president, that somehow this all could be averted. But that didn't happen that way. And, I still don't understand why he chose. Well, it's not like, I think people don't realize is that there was an interim, right, between the offering of the commanding of the Union forces, and then he just went back to Arlington. It wasn't like he immediately joined the Confederate Army. Right.
He was waiting on the decision of Virginia. He was waiting on the Virginia legislature to decide whether they were going to secede or not.
Yeah.
And, I took a note of that real fast here. And I put down, Lee is fighting for Virginia. Of course, at this point, he takes the job for the Confederacy. But I put down the note, Lee is fighting for Virginia. Virginia's fighting for states' rights. Lee doesn't care for states' rights. So why is Lee fighting for the Confederacy? He contradicts himself, like you said. It's mind-boggling.
Yes. And in this case, I would even refute Guelzo and say that's not a clear thinker.
No,
much less a profound thinker. It's not even a clear thinker, because none of this makes any type of sense. There's no linear connection to any of this.
No, and I mean, I get the idea you don't want to fight your neighbors. You don't want to fire on family and friends. I get that.
Yeah.
But if you don't believe in what they're, if your friends and family are fighting for the states' rights issue and you don't care about states' rights, why are you fighting with them? There comes a point when you've got to draw a line, and where do you stand?
It's almost as if, and this is just hitting me now, it's almost as if he is very tribal. He's a very tribal thinker. And it's all about, there's no way I could ever come into the state because of all my immediate clan, than our tribe. Then, you know what I mean? Like all the extended families that were all intermixed. You've got the Lees, you got the Fitzhughs, you've got the Custuses, you've got, and then it's almost like, it's like this nativist religion. It's like we revere the soil of Virginia as if it is God himself or something. And it does not resonate with me.
No, it's sickening. And then, they go back to Washington so much. He's our founder. He was a Virginian. Well, Washington, last time I checked, was a Federalist and was very strong for the entire thing, not the individual state.
Correct. And we'd be remiss if we didn't tell the viewers in the early portions of the book, which I found were a revelation to me, I guess. I didn't realize this, or I had forgotten, that the Lees back in the Revolutionary days, they were strong Federalists, Light Horse Harry.
Yeah.
So they were known to be Federalists. And it was almost as if Lee, the son, had to keep proving that, well, I don't really hold Federalist views.
Separate.
I don't think he really knew what he knew, or knew what he.
As long as he wasn't doing what his dad was doing.
Yes.
He felt he was okay. And Guelzo comes back to that point time and time again, just trying to separate himself from his dad.
Yeah.
And is this just one of those ways where he's trying to separate himself?
I think you're onto something there. And I think we touched on that in one of our Voxer messages to each other, that, was this just like someone, kicking against daddy? You know what I mean? I want to be different. Well, you really are. You were different. You became very different. All right. And, so he decides to join the Confederacy, after Virginia secedes. He accepts, he claims he accepts it with a heavy heart and all this kind of stuff, and hopes that blood won't be shed. But boy, once battle begins, I think there was a chapter in here where it's the Battle of Bull Run. And I think I mentioned this in one of my messages to you, that I just found the shift from that we're doomed, this is not going to be good, and then looking back just internally, what was his dialogue? Like, he served this country for 30 years in the military, and then they're fighting Bull Run, and there's bodies on the field, and he thinks it's a glorious victory. It's like, do you not feel any type of internal churn? Like,
and this is just a month or two after he makes the comments that I'm going to try to sit this out. I'm going to try to ride it out, sit at Arlington and just ride it out and not try to get involved.
Yeah.
And then bam, he's all in.
He's all in. Of course, he wasn't leading the armies at Bull Run. No. He was kind of back in President Jefferson Davis's, the Confederate president, his right-hand man, as far as trying to build the defenses of Richmond, which he did brilliantly because he's an engineer. He was a great engineer. So it took the wounding of General Joseph Johnston in the 7 days battles, right? And that's when he's catapulted to command, the actual in the field command, because before then people just thought he was too cautious. He was Granny Lee, and the king. They call him the King of Spades, because he just would have people dig entrenchments. But that was his genius. He knew how to build defenses, and he knew what kind of war it would be.
Well, very quickly he changes people's minds, though.
He changes people's minds. I mean,
at the Battle of Richmond.
Yes.
7 days battle.
7 days. He kind of turns it around. Oh, and then we'll talk about your favorite guy really quick, McClellan. Let me see. I love his expression. I'm going to tell you, everyone out there listening, I loved my Voxer messages from Bill when he would talk about McClellan, because boy, there was no love lost there. And I agree.
McClellan is a huge blowhard. You talk about somebody being full of hot air, full of himself, arrogant, pompous. There's so many words I want to use that YouTube's going to kick us off of this for the language I want to use against this guy. I despise McClellan. He is all talk, no bite.
Yeah. He never had enough troops though, Bill. And that was the problem.
Yeah, I mean, you could have gave that guy an army of 500,000 and it wouldn't have been enough.
No, it wouldn't.
Where he gets, oh my goodness, we could go into a whole, there are chunks of books written about the spies and stuff that were down south sending him his intel,
Yeah.
and just how badly he was off the mark on how big the Confederate army was.
Yeah.
And why he needed 150, 200, 250,000 men to invade Virginia. He could have finished, okay, this will be the last thing, I promise. He could have finished the Civil War right there in 1862.
Yeah.
If he would have drove straight south with that huge army, he
Yeah.
could have knocked Lee off the map.
That's right.
Hands down. I mean, there would have been some bloodshed, don't get me wrong, but it would have been one battle or one campaign. It wouldn't have been for 4 years. It wouldn't have been one and done.
Right. One and done. And then we wouldn't have had the 750,000 casualties that the Civil War eventually, accrued, which is horrific. But didn't you find it funny?
Sorry.
You're gonna love this. No, I had one more thing. And we're jumping way far ahead into the future with this, but did you guffaw out loud towards the end of the book when Guelzo's talking about how Lee kind of began to sign on to the lost cause mythology of the South was outnumbered and they didn't have enough.
Oh, his order number 9.
And then he says this, when someone said, could you name who did you think was the best Union general? And he never gave Grant any props. I think this was his pettiness. Well, guess what he answered? McClellan. Did you throw the book across the room when you read that?
He's clueless. He's clueless.
I mean, I think he said the best Union general was McClellan because he beat him so many times.
Well, and how much better can you insult the guy that beat you by saying the worst was better than you? I mean,
yeah. I think
that's all that comes down to.
I think it was sour grapes because he knew that Grant beat him hands down, and it wasn't about sheer numbers.
No,
it was about a stick-to-itiveness that Grant possessed. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but we'll get there. But yeah, so we'll get there pretty quickly actually, because as he takes over, right? He's very offensive and very aggressively natured general. We know this. This is something I want to bring up that stands out in this book, in my other readings of Lee, that Guelzo takes a contrary position regarding Lee's generalship, in the sense that most historians of the Civil War that really study Lee's generalship claim that he was a brilliant tactician, very weak strategically, didn't have the big overall vision between the Eastern theater and the Western theater, and that he gave short shrift to the Western theater of war as not as important as the Virginian theater of war. Well, Guelzo really stakes his own territory in saying the opposite.
He flips the script on that one.
He flips the script and says, actually, and I don't agree with Guelzo on this. I don't agree with him. And he's a far more learned man than I am. But he really says that Lee he had a great sense of strategy. He had a huge strategic vision, but he was not a great tactician, with tactics, because he kept using the same type of movements over and over. Yes and no. Yes, he liked big sweeping left flank attacks, but he says that he had a great strategic vision because he realized that you could only win the war in the East because of I think he framed it in the sense of the politics, like the North was dissatisfied. So he was picking up on those rumblings, right? So what he was trying to do was say, we got to win here and make the people at home vote out Lincoln and get the peace party in, which does have its merits.
Yep.
But in the overall, though, when you're in a war, I still think there was enough support on the northern side. I think he miscalculated that.
Well, he also plays into that in the fact that, like, on the battlefield itself, he has all of his generals that are doing the work. He hits on that quite a bit, that he had brilliant generals at the beginning of the war, and one of the reasons he loses is those brilliant generals begin to die. And so you can see that tactician part of it, that part of his argument, because he's given credit to Stonewall Jackson, to Jeb Stuart, to, you know, some of these generals who were great on the spot commanders. And when they die, that's when he starts losing.
Yes. And that could, yes. And so actually, yes, thank you for reminding me of this. This was a great other aspect that Guelzo dives into, is that I'm looking at maybe page 237 as we get into chapter 12. But he kind of, he had a propensity to leave the details to subordinates, right? He would craft a battle plan. And I guess what Lee wanted to do was, I bring you to the right place at the right time. You guys do the rest. I mean, that was basically how Lee was a general, how he led, which to me is not really leading, especially when you see that there were, as in any type of military hierarchy or scenario, you know, some people didn't like each other. You know, some people of equal rank, some people of higher or above, you know, they didn't get along. And you need to have an overall commander. I'm thinking of like Dwight Eisenhower. Man, that guy was a genius in World War II at dealing with personalities.
Juggling the personalities. Yep.
Oh my God, he was brilliant. Lee was not like that. I don't want to deal with it, you know. And he had his favorites. He had his little cadre of favorites, you know, and he kept favorites who were maybe not really great generals. He would overlook their mistakes, like AP Hill. Loved AP Hill, and then downgraded DH Hill, you know, Daniel Harvey Hill. I mean, there's a rumor that he's the one that dropped the missing orders, you know, at Antietam.
I had not heard that before.
Yeah, I don't know.
Orders that allowed McClellan to have the battle plan for
Antietam. Yeah, I don't know about that. The lost orders. Yeah, that's what they're called. But yeah, he basically would make him an overall battle plan, but it left too much for interpretation, is what Guelzo is trying to say, and what I've always thought too. Like at Gettysburg, he would bring the pieces together. But I think in a way, though, tell me if you think I'm wrong on this, Bill, his presentation of Gettysburg is he was very sympathetic to Lee. He thought he thought his generals let him down.
Yeah, and here's where Guelzo kind of goes back and forth with Lee a little bit, because, you know, at the end of Pickett's charge, he's it's my fault, boys, it's my fault. But then when Lee starts writing out the letters to Jefferson Davis explaining into other administration on exactly what happened, all the blame went away from him. The fingers were pointed to everybody else but him. And
That's right.
Gettysburg's just, it's interesting. I like to present it to my class as it is why we follow directions. You had so many Southern commanders who did not follow directions, or didn't follow through with the directions. And maybe that's a better way to put it, because when Lee, and he talks about this, I think he does, or am I thinking of the movie that I use? And I might be mixing my stuff up, but like on the northern end on day one, on the northern end of the battlefield, when they're told to take Culp's Hill, is that day one or day two? But anyway,
I think that's towards the end of day one. And that's where the fish hook kind of bends around.
Yeah. And they're told, take it if applicable.
Right, and that was General Ewell, Richard Ewell, that he was commanding to do that. If
Ewell's like, are you kidding me? They've got the high ground. And so he doesn't follow through. And I do think, honestly, this is where the death of Stonewall Jackson, so I might be going off track a little bit here.
No, that's okay.
I think the death of Stonewall Jackson truly cost the South in this respect, because I think Jackson would have taken the hill, or at least he would have gave a pretty good try at doing it. Where Ewell backed off. Yeah. And, you know, depending on the outcome, if Jackson would have or would not have taken that could have changed the overall battle big time. And so you got Guelzo, you know, he's given Lee credit because he got them where they needed to be. He gave the directions, but the directions didn't always get followed through. Is that how you take it?
Yes, I do take it, and it leads into another wonderful discussion that Guelzo goes into. I'm looking at page like 264, where he talks about the makeup of the officers in the Confederate Army, and and earlier in the book, he talks about how Lee was always complaining, right, about the dedication, about the Southern Army, about being able to do whatever it takes to win, and that they're not disciplined enough. They're not, remember, like Lee was actually quite critical in the beginning years of the war of his command about the sloppiness. Oh yeah. And we're not even talking about the desertions. He goes into, they had major problems with desertions. Now, remember, with Lee come back.
Yeah, late 1864, 65, 2/3 of the army's gone.
That's right. That's right. And Lee was always raging against that. So this brings in another aspect that I thought was just fascinating in it. And I put it down in my notes that, and he's talking about the line officers, the crucial line officers of the Army of Northern Virginia from that. So that's like from captains to colonels, right? So they tended to be young, and I'm kind of reading from the book here. Their median age was 31. They were surprisingly well educated. And roughly half the officers had some type of college training, right? And now this is interesting. They also tended to be disproportionately representative of slave-holding households. Approximately half of them either owned slaves or were sons of families that owned slaves. And they behaved with a swaggeringly self-righteous confidence in the virtue of slavery. Okay, so then what does that mean as far as like military, skills and leadership abilities? It says here, these characteristics guaranteed a mentality in Lee's army that was fatally infected with ideas of personal dominance, self-indulgence, and among the other ranks, a prickly proud resistance to taking orders. Back to what you just said, Bill. There was some resistance. So it's even like they were... It's like you go from states' rights to individual rights to, it's like a Russian doll of don't step on, don't tread on me, to the nth degree. You keep going smaller, smaller in the Southern Confederate mentality. And it defeated them in the end. But isn't that fascinating? That it just affected Army discipline, because a lot of these officers, like, you can't treat me like a slave. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I totally get what you mean. And that, let's see, that pride that they have goes a long ways. When you got swagger, it's just like, I think of sports, if you got a team that's got a little bit of swagger and they've got some skill, you can go a long ways. But if they are bucking the system and going against the commanders, in the end, when the going gets tough, it's not going to end well. It's not going to end well.
And I think Guelzo calls it, he has a great phrase for it. He calls it this top lofty attitude, So, and he says here that this top lofty attitude only fed Lee's frustrations with Southern disbelief in the self-denial necessary to win the war. So, and it says here, the officers, like you said, that he found conformed to his sense of belief in the self-denial necessary were Longstreet and Jackson. So Jackson is hit by friendly fire after the successful flank attack at Chancellorsville, arms amputated, develops pneumonia and dies. Like you said, huge blow to Lee, because Jackson had the right attitude. Same as Longstreet. He was a fantastic general who was later, derided by the Lost Cause fanatics, and defamed, I think. But anyway, then Longstreet in the Battle of the Wilderness is also hit, I think, by friendly fire and taken out for a while. So he lost two of the main officers who understood how to follow orders.
Well, here's a question for you. So
my dog out real quick.
Longstreet, great general. At Gettysburg, he questions Lee, and I don't remember seeing it in the book, but I've seen it in other things.
There we go. Sorry.
Where Longstreet questions Lee several times on some of his ideas for the battle. So is that the same thing as what we're talking about? Or does he have a better outlook? So I'm thinking of the southern end of the battlefield at Little Round Top and Big Round Top, and where, if I remember correctly. I'm not even going to try to explain it because I'm not going to explain it correctly.
That's okay.
I know there's some questioning going on there, and Lee, makes the statement, no, they're there. We're going to fight them there.
Yeah.
Is that do you think that's the same thing?
That because
With the questioning?
Well, you know what? I think Longstreet was held in such esteem by Robert E. Lee, and Longstreet knew that Lee trusted his judgment, so that he felt comfortable sharing his true assessment. And also, Lee was a human being, and he could make mistakes, and he hadn't been, privy to a lot of or he wasn't really up at the front as much as Longstreet was. To say they're there, we will take it. I think he did have a sense of it. And after Chancellorsville, I think he felt they were undefeatable. The Southern Army of Northern Virginia. So, Longstreet was a reality check, and he said, General, in all my years as a soldier, no division, no brigade, no regiment, no division ever assembled. No division ever assembled in the face of either could take that position.
Yeah.
And he didn't listen to him.
You're talking Pickett's charge?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. He didn't listen to him. So.
And that's sad. But again, it gets back to what you were saying about if you are a great overall strategic commander, you listen to those things.
Yeah. Yeah, you do. I don't know why my version of Zoom is telling me this, but it's going to run out again.
It popped up on mine too.
Dang it. I can send another one, and I can splice in these three videos for you.
I'm fine with that. If you're wanting to keep going, I'm fine with that.
Well, I think we just have to I don't want to rush, obviously, the after the war stuff. So I'll set up another one. Just be ready for the next meeting invite. I really apologize,
Bill. Play this one out?
Yeah, let's just play it out.
Let's play it out. Okay.
All right. So we're moving on now, guys, to
excuse me.
Yeah, so let's talk about, Meade gets a bad rap because he doesn't follow up, Lee's retreat. Lee accepts responsibility for Gettysburg, and he doesn't accept responsibility for Gettysburg.
Yep.
He contradicts himself again. Yeah, he contradicts himself yet again.
Real fast, there was something there that Guelzo points out that I guess I just wasn't aware. After Gettysburg, and then I think after Antietam also, or maybe it was just Antietam and not Gettysburg, but you correct me if I'm wrong, but Lee was bringing up plans for a counterattack. After being driven back, he was one of those battles, at least one of those battles, it was saying that he was coming up with plans for a counterattack. Do you remember that, or am I making it up?
That might have been after Antietam.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that might have been Antietam. I think he wanted to go back north immediately, and Jefferson
did not realize that either.
Yeah, he was really hardcore about it. Jefferson Davis was like, no. He goes, that's when they started having those problems in the Western Theater, and he had to do some reorganizing of his army, right? And that's when they sent Longstreet out west to help Braxton Bragg in Tennessee for a little while. So no, he really wanted to keep up moving north and attacking again, but Jefferson Davis was like, no. So that's what happened there.
Then the other thing that happens here, that's a big one that I took note of, that I just, like I said, I've never read a biography on Lee, so I wasn't aware of it, but his attacks.
Oh yeah. Yeah, his health.
I mean, granted, that is definitely a stressful job, so I get it, but yeah, I asked you in the Voxer chat what you thought if Lee would have died at this point, because let's see, September 20th, 1863. So this is July, August, of 2 months, almost 2.5 months after he's having his second heart attack after Gettysburg. So what happens if he dies? What do you think would have happened?
I think, I'm going to stick with what I told you. I think I think the only viable general that could have taken over would have been putting Johnston back in charge, Joseph Johnston. He was very popular with his troops. His troops loved Joseph Johnston. Davis, and famously, Johnston and Davis hated each other.
They didn't get along very well.
They didn't. Jefferson Davis was an interesting bird as well, because, he also had his favorites that he protected, promoted. I mean, Braxton Bragg, he loved Braxton Bragg. His troops hated him, and he was not a very good general.
No.
He was not very good at all. And I think there were a couple battles in the West that weren't entirely his fault, but he was not a good one. But you know what? He still was left in charge. I mean, so Jefferson Davis, we could spend a whole nother, a book chat on that, or just, he made some really poor decisions. So I think it would have been Joseph Johnston.
Okay.
Yeah. So Grant is elevated, and that's my guy. And that I might be a little biased. I am a little biased here, but I mean, just reading from everything we've read, we know Grant was just a different level entirely, when it came to just a well-rounded soldier who kept moving forward. And he knew, and he was also on board with Lincoln's belief that you have to destroy Lee's army to win this war. It's not about capturing Richmond. It's about destroying the means that they perpetuate this war, which is that army. So, and that's why when Grant is attached and, Meade stays in command of the Army of the Potomac, but, Grant's got the overall command. It's just like, wherever Lee goes, you will go also, which also meant Grant, because Grant was basically traveling with Meade, watching over the scenarios.
Well, he's just going to use Lee's habits of being aggressive up to this point, and that attitude that we will never lose. He plays that out perfectly and uses that to his advantage. Where you want to keep throwing that army that's dwindling at us, keep doing it. I mean, yes, it's going to be big losses on the Union side, but eventually you're not going to have an army to fight with.
That's right.
And I just.
That's eventually what happened. That's exactly how it played out. Yeah. And of course, Grant made mistakes, and he admitted to them. Cold Harbor should never have happened. But I disagree heartily with any person that that call him a butcher, because that is not. That
name could have been given to any of them, if you want to go there.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. That could have been given to Lee. He was overly aggressive with forces he couldn't afford to lose. I think he was reckless at times. So then we move into the horrible. They were just horribly bloody, horrific scenes of hell of the battles of the Wilderness, which kind of were fought over the same grounds as Chancellorsville, big wilderness area. I know we're going to be running out of time soon.
Let's call a timeout.
Okay.
You want to do that? This is a good stopping spot.
All right, we're going to stop here. We're going to start up at the Wilderness. We'll be right back. Okay.